Hello, and welcome to the Dr. Money Matters podcast, the show where we discuss important financial topics that were never covered in med school. I'm your host, Dr. Tarang Patel. On this episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast, I'm talking with Drs. Renee and Renee Darko about their journey of paying back about $650,000 worth of student loans. They're a couple that you probably have heard of if you're in the podcast, if you listen to podcasts or are on social media. They've been interviewed by a few of the bigger financial podcasts, and Nee also hosts a very successful physician podcast called Docs Outside the Box. And that show was actually one of my inspirations to start this show. So I wanted to talk about the student loan crisis just because obviously, most of you who are listening are health professionals or are married to health professionals or are thinking about going into professional school, and the loan amounts are daunting. Well, Nee and Renee talk about their journey, about how they accumulated so much debt, and then about their financial history and background and how they were able to go about paying off such what seems like an utterly ridiculous amount in a short time span. Granted, they're a dual physician specialist couple, so that helps, but they went hardcore and really cut back and were able to pay this loan amount off. On a subsequent podcast, I actually talked to another physician who is a hospitalist, and about how she was able to pay back her loans. While not quite as large of an amount, she's also dealing with a lower income. And so it's still an inspirational story also. So she was able to pay off about $100,000 in 12 months and is on target to pay off $150,000 in 18 months. So whatever side of the physician income spectrum you're on, most people who are recent graduates are facing these kind of loan burdens. So I just want you to know that it's possible to acquire this much debt and pay it off. You just have to buckle down and do it. But if you've gotten through medical school or are going through medical school or dental school, whatever, you've already shown the fortitude and the ability to work hard. So just sit back and listen. I had a really good and fun conversation with Dr. Nee and Dr. Renee, and let them tell you their story about paying back student loans. All right, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Money Matters podcast. My guests today are voices that you probably have heard if you're a podcast fan. Dr. Nee Darko and his wife Renee, Dr. Renee Darko. Nee is a trauma surgeon and the host of the Docs Outside the Box podcast, my original inspiration for starting my podcast. So I'm glad to have Nee on the show. And Dr. Renee Darko is an OBGYN who also runs the pre-med advisory service called Pre-Med Strategies, where she focuses on coaching pre-meds with their questions about getting into med school. Welcome, guys.
Hey, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Nee's head has grown about 5 centimeters since you said that he was the inspiration for your podcast.
I think she's got the pen. I think a lot of doctors who are doing this podcast, who are in the podcasting field now, would probably point to Nee as one of the earlier ones out there. And it was, his podcast that kind of just showed us, hey, we can do this. And he was always very upfront about his struggles and starting the podcast. So I think a lot of us can kind of relate to that. So I want to thank you guys for coming on. Today's show is going to be about you guys had a story on your podcast, Nee, that kind of went viral about paying off your education debt. And you guys had a pretty significant amount of debt, and you guys buckled down and paid it off in a relatively short period of time. So tell me, how much was that debt? And then, we'll get into the mechanics of how you did it. But I just, was it like 600,000?
What's debt? What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
That's the goal, my friend. That's the goal.
Yeah. It was $662,000 of student loan debt between both of us. And then we still have a condo that I stupidly got when I graduated from medical school and I was doing my residency in Atlanta. I kind of just thought that I deserved a house. So we still have this rental property that we have down in Atlanta, Georgia. But yeah, we got our student loans paid off in 3 years, $662,000 of it. And since then, it's kind of just been like I don't even know if we even think about it anymore. Just like it's just gone.
Yeah, it's a thing of the past.
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna talk about that in detail. But let's before we get into that a little bit, so tell me a little bit about your guys' backgrounds. You know, what got you into medicine? Why did you pick the fields that you guys ended up in?
Well, my first memories of my childhood is of me saying I wanted to be actually a nurse first. And then my dad was like, why not a doctor? And I said to him, well, Dad, girls can't be doctors. And he's like, of course they can. I'm like, okay, well, then I want to be a doctor.
Good dad. Good dad.
Yeah, good dad, right? But fast forward, obviously a 3-year-old can't make that decision for me. But I've always just, again, loved the math, the sciences, just kind of like most pre-meds, and always wanted to help people. But I thought that, this being in medicine would be the way that I could help people the best. It was something that was interesting to me. It was fulfilling to me. And I just always thought that that's what I wanted to do. So I ended up going to school in Kansas City with me. And we actually met just a few months before we started school, but we became study partners, eventually led to a relationship. I ended up doing my residency out in New Brunswick, New Jersey at Robert Wood Johnson. And yeah, then I'll let Nee tell the rest, actually, since my story is intertwined with his.
Basically, you couldn't live without me anymore. She was like,
yeah, that's exactly how it went.
Let's make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mine is, it's funny. We both grew up in New York City. I grew up in New York until basically 11 years old, but we grew up, 15 minutes from each other, but we never knew each other.
Right.
I grew up in Queens, New York. And for me, I fell in love with the concept of Heathcliff Huxtable and just kind of his lifestyle, having a nice life, living in Brooklyn, beautiful wife who's a lawyer, kids, having a brownstone. What else could anybody want, particularly someone like me who grew up in Queens, New York. So I kind of early on knew that that's kind of the lifestyle that I would want, but I didn't know how to get there. There was nobody in my family who was in the medical arena whatsoever. But fast forward, I became a doctor. And from there, I went to Morehouse in Atlanta, Georgia, did general surgery just because I loved operating. I loved just dealing with things being a black box, and you're kind of there to kind of save the day from a trauma standpoint. And then from Miami, and then me and my wife, we decided to get married, and we're here now in Pennsylvania.
Wow. Okay. So you guys, went to Kansas City, and that's where, is that where the education debt started?
No.
Started in college.
It started in college, So for me, I remember in 1996 when I'm, a freshman or doing my FAFSA paperwork, I remember getting all these promissory notes, right? And just signing them and just whatever, man. I know I got to pay them back, but it's almost like they go into the cloud and you worry about them later on. And I remember every semester I'd have to sign these papers and stuff. And it's from Sally Mae or whoever owned the loans in the beginning. I think it was the Pennsylvania Higher Education something, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, just signing them off and you're just whatever. For me, it didn't really start to get real until we got into medical school, when basically what I graduated in 4 years in terms of loans, I took out in my first semester of medical school. And I was like, wait, what? And then you start looking at the way how it's going to go for the next, 3.5 years. And you're like, man, I'm going to graduate with over $200,000 of debt. And with Renee, obviously, I'm sure it's the same thing, but we also got our MBAs also at the same time. So that added on some more debt also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, my story is very similar, just signing promissory notes, because at that point, right, when you're that young, you're just preoccupied with going to school, the ability to go to school. So you're not really thinking about the implications of these promissory notes and what it's doing to your future income. So you just sign them off. And like Nee said, not only did we go to medical school, We also got MBAs while we were in medical school. So again, just kind of I just want to go to school. I want to be as educated as possible. I want to acquire these credentials. And that is something that you do pretty much at any cost.
And I think that's a good point there, Renee, because I think as doctors, but in general, our society values education so much that, we get the MD, the DO, but as doctors, we also tend to look for additional credentials. And it's, I've had an episode about this, about the MBA, and I think it's a great educational achievement. I think it's a great thing to have in your background, but it's also one of those things where, it's a cost benefit analysis. And of course, while you're in medical school, it's easy to do. So it's, meaning to go ahead and get it. But it's one of those things that I think that we need to always kind of preemptively assess. But no one does that in their pre-med or med school days. So I got to say, you guys are probably, that's how the majority of medical students, in the U.S. are, and particularly those who end up at private schools, where the educational burden is significantly higher, the debt burden. So, yeah. So you guys, both are kind of similar stories, similar backgrounds. What were your financial backgrounds like prior to going to college or med school? Is this something you guys talked about in your families?
No, we just
one word, broke.
Yeah.
One word, broke.
Yeah.
I mean, I think me and I grew up pretty similarly, blue collar family. I grew up in Brooklyn. Like he said, he grew up in Queens, and, money. So at least in my household, money was something that you used basically to pay the bills that you needed to pay that you could actually pay, right? Like, it's like, well, the light bill's due, better pay that or else we're going to be in the dark, There was not this sense of, oh, well, we have disposable income and, we're going to invest or we're going to be putting away for college. And, and my parents were not irresponsible with money at all by any means. It's just, they knew to some extent how money worked, but not to the extent that I think I needed once I was done with medical school and had all of this debt. And
Need, would you say similar for you?
Similar, but I'll leave it to like this. Like my growing up was, just very, middle class, blue collar type of background. The most I got was basically save your money. That's the most advice I would get from my parents, basically. Mm-hmm. You need to save your money, like no specifics of bank accounts or stocks or investing, nothing like that, or money can work for you. Just save your money. Okay, well, what does that mean? And, for me, I'll leave it to you like this. It wasn't until like 5 years ago that I finally realized that people bought cars for cash. I just thought that everybody bought cars, like financed their cars, like I just did not have that type of understanding that people had that much or there are amount of people who had disposable income or they saved and got to a point where they can actually pay for a car cash. Like these are things that I just learned in my 30s that I wish I had learned earlier. And just like Renee was describing, I don't think it's a situation where like, my parents were neglectful or anything like that. It's just that they didn't know, and just kind of make it up as you go. So we were talking earlier today, we were driving home and we were talking about, we're high net worth professionals, but literally at one point we were living paycheck to paycheck.
Yes.
Like for real, like she's an OB-GYN, I'm a trauma surgeon, and we were living paycheck to paycheck. And we were in our 30s. Mm-hmm. So that just lets you know, like just because you're a well-educated person, just because you're a high net worth person doesn't mean that all of a sudden these great investment ideas and these great money, mantra type ideas come with you. It's just
financial education doesn't automatically happen because you're a high income earner.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's that's one of the genesis for my podcast is that, we spend so much time, learning about the stuff that we need to learn for our medical fields, and I'm not advocating necessarily adding more education to medical school because we have enough demands there, but it does come with the idea that, some people have an interest in this stuff. Some people have family backgrounds that allow, that this knowledge is passed on, but it's not a given that this is going to happen with all physicians. And I would say most physicians don't get this. And, this was written in that famous book, The Millionaire Next Door, talking about physicians as relative under accumulators of wealth despite having high incomes. So I think, you're not alone, particularly early on in your clinical practices. Most physicians have the debt burden. Most physicians, are living paycheck to paycheck just because they've come out of such a long period of no income or or relatively low income. So, I think that situation that you guys are in, while it sucks, it's not uncommon. What's different with you guys is that you guys realized it. You saw the paperwork. I mean, you saw the debt burden, and you guys did something about it. So let's get into it now. Let's talk about, when was your light bulb moment that, whoa, something's going on with our debt here?
You're making my blood pressure go up, man. Because it literally, that is our moment of, at least for me, that was the big moment of failure for me from a financial standpoint. I did everything I was supposed to do. I went to school the right way, and I did everything that I was supposed to be doing like a normal immigrant kid. I went to school, I stayed out of trouble, and now, me and my wife, we get married, and we are literally broke. We are broke as a joke. Right. And we never, fooled ourselves into thinking, well, we both make a high amount of salary, so we can pay this debt off really quickly. And so we should get a house and we should get a car and then pay this stuff over time. We just knew literally that our house was under duress. Our house was in fire. So the number one issue that started this whole process was we got married. I already came into the marriage with a cash value life insurance plan. My wife also did the same thing because I convinced her that this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And we noticed that we were paying more to our cash value life insurance than to our loans.
Yes.
For real.
Yes.
Like that, there's something wrong with that. You know what I'm saying? And so we were talking to our life insurance guy, who was trying to basically act like he was our investment guy. You know the story, right? You know how this works, right? You know how it is.
He's going to be your financial planner. He's going to take care of everything. He's going to take care of your money better than you could ever take care of it.
And not to mention, I met this guy in a club, right? But that's another story.
That's a totally different story.
You know what I'm saying?
That's where all the best financial decisions are made.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Little drinky drink.
So basically my wife had noticed, she's like, we're paying way more towards our cash value life insurance.
And disability.
And we're not making any debt into our student loans whatsoever. And I just noticed that our guy never called us back to say, hey, look, you guys are married. Maybe your experiences, maybe your needs have changed. Just reassess your insurance plan, change your insurance plan. That never occurred. So we called him and said, look, we'd like to make some changes to our life insurance plan because it's not working for us. And his answer to us was, well, you guys need to budget better.
Right.
Right. And it was that was so sobering. It was so okay, actually, technically you're right. But also at the same time, the fact that you're not trying to lower your insurance plan tells me something about how valuable this is to you.
Right. So we budgeted him right out of our lives.
Yeah, it was like, go.
Line item 0.
And that's when we realized that we didn't have much financial information whatsoever. So basically, I kind of just listened to what he said, and I said, okay, we'll go ahead and do this. And I realized that at this moment, I had no power. So what happened next is I literally started listening to podcasts like crazy, personal finance websites like crazy, and, discovered Dave Ramsey, discovered Farnoosh Torabi, discovered His and Her Money podcast, all these different blogs, and just started getting a lot of education. And then started, obviously discovered the White Coat Investor also, and started looking at, wait, hold on a second. We put in X, and then by the end of the year, our cash value life insurance was Y, but it was minus all these different fees. We're like, wait, what is going on here? So long story short, we just said, that's it, we're done. We got rid of our cash value life insurance plan. We found a new financial advisor. we were able to kind of make a budget for ourselves and a plan as to when we would be able to pay off our student loans. Initially, we thought maybe, 15 years?
Yeah, well, we thought initially what we would do, well, the original plan was 5 years for the private loans. Then we said, well, maybe 3 years for the private loans, and then we'll pay the federal loans off in 10 years. That was the original plan. And one day, as we were on our 3-year plan to pay off the private loans, I said to Nee, I had a day off, and, good things happen on my days off. I have a lot of ideas.
Or trouble.
But one day, I had a day off. Nee comes home, and I say to him, I'm like, look, we could pay off our private loans in a year.
As I'm walking through the door. Seriously, that's how it went.
And he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we can pay it off in a year, because I calculated how much we actually made. And I said, well, if we lived off one salary, then the other salary can go towards paying off these private loans. And so he didn't believe me at first, and eventually he came around. But
you showed me the math.
Well, yes, I showed you the math. I showed him the math. I actually called Sally Mae, had them calculate it out for us, how much the payments would be if we paid them off in a year. And then he came around and was like, oh my God, you're right. And we ended up actually paying it off in 6 months, because not only did we budget, but when we got rid of our cash value and went to a term life insurance, we got a bunch of money that was there after the surrender value. Right.
There was still such a large chunk of money that we never spent. We took that out and just literally, we didn't do anything with it, but just put it straight towards student loan debt. And that gave us literally this. It was like going down a hill, like a snowball effect. And that allowed us to pay off our private loans in 6 months. That was about 130?
Yeah, about $130,000.
$130,000. And then that's when the light bulb went off, because those loans were between 6 and 9%. And you got to imagine, every month we were making minimum payments prior to this, right? So we were looking at our loans increase on a monthly basis, which is completely disheartening. So just like that, in 6 months, the biggest painful part of our student loans were gone. We're like, wait.
Just went down to zero.
Wait, what? You were right. If we can really focus for the next 5 years, we can get our federal loans taken care of.
Right. And then I said, no, let's not do 5 years. Let's do 3.
So that was the plan when I left, right? So I was going to work. Yeah, we could do it in 5 years. Come back home, open the door. Oh, you remember I was talking about we could do it in 3 years now. Wait, what?
That one took a lot of convincing. We had our federal student loan debt, that was the original 10-year plan, if you remember. We dwindled it down to a 5-year plan, and I was like a fiend. I was like, no, there's no way I'm going to spend the next 5 years of our lives paying off student loan debt. And so we brought it down to 3. And we buckled down. We literally went to work,
And that's where the real story is. The real story is how uncomfortable did we want to get to pay off these student loans, and what the student loans actually represented to us. And that's the real story. And that's the reason why we were able to pay it off so aggressively, is because they represented every pain point to us, whether it be, my wife, wanting to be a doctor because, she was told that, why not just be a nurse, just be a doctor. That promise of having this life as a doctor, me having this promise of being in Brooklyn, living in a brownstone, having this life. And then you get to become a physician, and to some extent, what you kind of wanted or what your expectations were didn't really meet what you got when you got there. So that was part of that pain process, not understanding finances, all those different things just really gave us the fire to pay off our student loans as much as possible. Being in a situation where I couldn't really control my schedule, missing weddings, missing major events because I had to work. And we just said, look, the big issue is we have to work because we have to pay off our student loans. But what if we didn't have to pay off our student loans? Would our lives be that much better? And we said yes. So the amount of sacrifice we did, there was a point where we were living apart for 2 weeks every month for like a good, 7 to 8 months? Because I would work in a different part of the country. So my job, as a trauma surgeon, it's very shift workish. I'd work for 2 weeks and then I had 2 weeks off. So what I would do is those next 2 weeks, literally, as soon as I finished my shift, I'd take 24 hours and then I'd go to the next spot and I would work.
Wow. Okay.
And all of that money was put towards student loans. So
yeah, I mean, this is, you guys got to this point where you were very aggressive, and a lot of people, I mean, it's amazing that you're able to do it, but it really requires dedication to do it. And it's awesome that you did it. Now, my question, and I think this is one that a lot of people would want to know, is so, you got out of residency. Did you both kind of finish around the same time?
Yeah, around the same time, a couple of years off.
Okay. So when you guys were both, I'm trying to figure out the timeline a little bit. So when did you guys, when did this moment come to you in terms of when you were attending residence, a couple of years into your, practice?
So it's really, so let me just backtrack a little bit and say, I mean, Nee and I have had a little bit of a history with just, I guess, introduction to finance from the time we were in medical school, but the issues didn't actually hit until we were attendings after we were married. So what I'm talking about is we had gone to a conference at one point in time. You remember when we went to Region 9 Brooklyn conference? Anyway, we went to a conference at one point in time, and someone had given, a financial planner actually had given a talk. And he was talking about student loan debt and how his wife was in student loan debt and how they lived on his salary and paid off the student loan debt with her salary. And so that was when we were first years in medical school. And we never really thought, we actually never really thought about it. I don't even think we've talked about it until actually today. I don't think we've ever really thought about it. But fast forward, we get married in 2013, in November of 2013. And literally by September, October of 2014, we're like, fed up and just like, this is ridiculous. We're spending all of this money on insurance and not putting any money towards our student loan debt. And that's actually when the epiphany happens. So you'll see, even when we started our blog, Keeping Up with the Darkos, that's at the point at which you see, okay, there's an epiphany happening here. These people have just realized that they're dead broke.
Yeah. And so that's, I think, a critical point, because once, what you guys were talking about before, Nee, I think was, you had a 10-year plan, or initially you were doing the minimum payments and it was a longer, and you're like, okay, I'll just pay it off in a number of years. And the same thing you mentioned about, not knowing that you could pay for a car in terms of a cash, just assuming installment payments. I think that's what we're all conditioned to do, is have this long term, much like buying a house. Everyone buys, and has a 30-year mortgage. That's the traditional mentality. And so, for you guys to kind of reel that in early on, right as residency was ending, early attending time period is critical, because I think once you grow into that attending salary, and the White Coat Investor talks about this all the time, it's really hard to reel it back in. So I think that's a critical, a good point that you guys did. And you were making sacrifice. Obviously, time is a serious sacrifice, and you guys definitely, did that. But, maybe you weren't so much in the, financial sacrificing, because you didn't have it initially and you were paying it off. And I think that's the way to do it. So you're doing the debt pay down. You're doing, this 10-year plan, 5-year plan. Renee, you keep whittling it down to 3 years. So at what point
she even had the calculations for a year, and I was like, all right, that's ridiculous. Remember she had the calculations I was like, come on now, stop, all right, we're not gonna do it in a year.
And we hit it.
No, we didn't do it in a year.
Well, okay,
for the whole
fine.
year. Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
For 1 year, yes, that would be too much. Yeah.
So, and I think you already touched on the point that once you were able to pay off your private loans, that's when it really hit at home that you're like, okay, this is good. We're making an impact here. And then that gives you the incentive and the motivation to continue doing it. So fast forward to the point where you guys are about ready to pay off your loans. Give me a time span. So was it 3 years?
So October of 2014 was just kind of, like I said, the epiphany. And then by December of 2017, so 38 months, just a little bit above 3 years and 2 months.
And that wasn't a plan. The plan was what?
Well, yeah,
the plan was
right.
The plan was 3.5 years to get it paid off.
Right, because the private loans was supposed to actually be a year, and that ended up being 6 months. The federal loans was supposed to be a total of 3 years, which would have put us at 3.5 years. So we actually ended up making our deadline actually 3 months earlier than what we initially, or I don't know, I shouldn't use the word initially because I did keep dwindling it down, but 3 months earlier than we had planned. So we were really excited when we realized in December. I think Nee is the one that realized we were doing the budget, and he looks at the budget and he goes, we could pay this off. And I was like, okay, well, then let's just pay it off. And he's like,
yeah. I didn't know you were going to actually agree with me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, let's just pay it off. And he was just like, are you sure? Because we have this, we have that. I'm like, look, we have dedicated ourselves. We have sacrificed. We live far from our families, so that we can live in a place that has a low cost of living. We have done a lot of sacrifices. Paying this off right now is just going to be the culmination of all of that. And it's just going to set us free. Let's just pay it off. And lo and behold, that's what we did. I think it was December 5th?
Yeah, something like that.
December 5th of 2017, we paid that bad boy off.
Nice. Now you guys are going to have to celebrate that as an anniversary date, I think, an additional anniversary.
Know, right?
We may have to Twitter account, set the picture out.
Yeah.
That's when we did it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when you paid it off, what was that feeling like?
Man, I don't know if you know that guy. What's his name again?
D1.
D1. He has a song called I Finished Paying Sally Mae Back. So Nee cues up the video and starts playing the song. And then we go on to our respective computers. I go on my account. He goes on his account. And we press send. And we just started screaming.
That's awesome.
Oh my gosh!
My parents are like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal? It's amazing how parents don't really kind of understand what's going on sometimes.
Right.
But yeah.
Nice. Okay, so fast forward, we're in May now. How have you guys? How has your lifestyle changed, or has it?
It hasn't changed.
Not at all.
Not at all. So we are now building wealth now. So that's the stage that we're in now. So, so many people would say, well, why didn't you just invest a significant portion of that money and then kind of take a more balanced approach? And our response was, okay, so at one point we were anywhere between 75 to 80% of our total income was going towards student loans on a monthly basis. So we were just like, okay, well, since we're getting used to this is becoming a habit. By the time we get our student loans paid off, all we have to do is change that line item from student loan debt to savings.
Investment.
It's savings and investments. So we were still doing 401ks, right? Just as a preference. We were still doing 401ks. We were still getting the matches at work. And then when we both left our jobs and became independent contractors, we were still maximizing our SEP IRAs and so forth. But from a traditional sense of investing, we didn't do any of that.
Very minimal.
Yeah. So now it's just literally, we just changed the line item from debt to savings now.
Right. So you're seeing your net worth, instead of, 10 months ago doing significant decreases in the negative column, now you're starting to see the significant increases in the positive column.
Right. Exactly.
Good.
And I think some people would have said, you could have invested in stuff, but I think by what you were describing, by paying your retirement accounts and things like that, you've already handled the best portion of it. Investing in the taxable account, while it can be a great thing, I think that's where you start getting into the more esoteric things about paying off debt versus putting it into a taxable account. There's a percentage or two difference that could happen, but there's no guarantee when you pay off or when you invest, whereas paying down debt, there's always a guaranteed amount of return. So,
right. Exactly.
So, and not to belabor the point, but this is one thing I want to say, though, real quick. I hate to belabor this point, but this is something that was really important to us is by the time. So I'm not going to lie. The stock market is at 24,000 right now. Like, so there's a good 3 years that we missed out on phenomenal growth, right? Let's not lie. 3 years ago, it was at 16,000 or something like that. So I'm not going to lie. We missed out on a lot of growth. But the one thing that we can say that we can never get back or that we really value more so than the growth is our time and our freedom.
Right.
That's one thing that you can't put a monetary amount on. And the fact that now we work as independent contractors, if we want to take 6 months off, we can. If we want to take some more significant time off, we can. If something major happens, we can do that without feeling distressed of what's going to happen at the end of the month. We got to pay off this student loan debt. And we're not saying that to brag, but we're just saying that everybody's motivation is different. And for us, granted, would our portfolio have been a lot larger now if we had invested all that money?
Sure.
Yes. But for us, the ability to literally on a Wednesday, during the middle of the day to not be in a hospital and be able to record with you and not have any stress about, me having to go back in, that you can't put a price tag on that from our standpoint.
I agree with that because I think that is the biggest issue. And I think that when people are getting advice from financial people, that's the one thing that, it has to be a personal decision. You cannot quantify that. Some people are very comfortable with hanging on to debt because of, like you described, investing it with the potential, no guarantee, but the potential for better gains. And other people prefer the peace of mind. And I think there's no right or wrong there. I think that's just an individual decision. And for you guys, clearly this was the right decision. So I congratulate you on, pushing through it because that is a tough road that you guys did to get to this point. And now you've kind of gotten used to, that type of lifestyle a little bit. And you have the freedom to relax it a little bit if you choose to. But again, that's the freedom part. So awesome. So, so you guys, the one thing that I think is a little bit specific to student loans was that there, some people will say, well, what about the idea that you could have had that loan forgiveness or, a little bit of, loans are discharged in the case of disability or, or death, It's again, you have to fit those very specific criteria to get those benefits. I mean, obviously death or disability is a bad thing, but even the loan forgiveness program that's out now, it's only now very few people are starting to qualify. So,
right. And there's no guarantee, right, that these programs will last forever. So you may be in the middle of, let's say, a 10-year program. And next, by year 3, there's no more program. What do you do now? So, I think for me, I think it's best when you can have control, as much control as possible over your own destiny. Obviously, you can't control everything, but there are certain things that you can control or, that certainly are more appealing if you can control them. So, for us, it was not, we did talk about loan repayment. We did talk about that, but it just was not an option for us because we wanted to be sure that we would pay it off when we decided it was going to be paid off.
Right. And again, I think, it's a personal decision, but I think, for you guys, clearly that was the right decision. For someone else, it may not be, but the moment that that feeling that you guys must have had when you paid it off, I like you said, you can't put a price on that. So
really,
so now that it is paid off, and you guys are already a very creative couple. You have multiple ventures, me with the podcast, Renee with the pre-med coaching, and you guys together with the locums company, Equal Access Health. There's your promo.
Thank you.
Do you find that having, the freedom now allows you to put more time into these, what a lot of people would call alternative ventures?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So now that we have a son,
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. And his story actually is a financial one also. Yeah. So I will digress for a second, but so during our debt payoff, we were actually trying to conceive and we had a little bit of trouble, ended up doing multiple rounds of IVF and decided that we would not create any more debt for ourselves. And as you know, IVF can be very expensive. Many insurance companies don't pay for a large majority of IVF. And we're talking about, potentially a five-figure number pay for multiple rounds of IVF. And so we paid a pretty penny. We probably paid upwards of $60,000 in IVF. And then our son came spontaneously. But I digress. But now that we do have a son and we have these multiple ventures, as well as, we do still practice, Nee mentioned we're independent contractors, so we get to work when we want. And so on the days that we're not working at the hospital, we're spending a lot of time working on the podcast, the pre-med coaching, the locums agency, and obviously taking care of my son. So I call myself a stay-at-home OBGYN. But yeah, we are finding that we have a lot more time. And each of these businesses, it's funny you mentioned that today because that's the blog post that I'm about to put out on Keeping Up with the Darkos, is that our businesses have been able to flourish since we paid off the student loan debt. That burden, that financial burden actually allows us the time that we need to make our businesses do what we want them to do.
That's fantastic. I think that is as good of an endorsement there for paying off your debt as you can get, because the freedom that it's allowed you guys, may not have been the case had you, had the debt burden continuously hanging over you. You got to go into that hospital for another shift or take another locums assignment. So I think that is a good endorsement as you can get. Well, let me ask you, what are your guys' plans now, for all your ventures?
Well, I think so. As you know, we love different types of businesses. The podcast is growing. Nee just wrote a book. My pre-med coaching business, I just launched 2 different programs. I'm also in the process of writing a book myself.
You guys are making the rest of us doctors feel very inadequate. You know that now.
No, guys can do it too.
You know what it is too is and I know we're joking and stuff, is like each and everybody who's listening to this podcast, all the doctors out there, they can do the same thing that we're doing. We just decided to stop making excuses and just decided to just kind of go towards our passion, right? And once we kind of just stopped looking at life in terms of, well, I can't do this and I can't do that, and turned it into why not us?
Right.
Then that's when it really started. We started to see the possibilities. Like, why can't we not have a life of student loan debt? Like, why can't we not buy some used cars and pay for it cash? Or why can't I start a podcast about doctors who are living outside of the box and living outside of medicine and enjoying it if nobody else is doing it? I might as well just do it.
Right.
Same thing with my wife. Like, she enjoys talking to pre-med students, and there are a lot of people out there who do pre-med coaching, but that's her passion. And she says, why not her? Like, she's helped so many people get in. Why not? So for us, it's just been we just changed our mindset to instead of we can't because of X, Y, and Z, to more of a why not? And you know what, though? If we fail, so what? Like, who cares? If we fail, then you know what? We'll go back to being employed doctors. Exactly. We'll go back to being employed doctors.
Worst case scenario, we'll go back to, being salaried.
And then we'll close the businesses and that's it. It's just, that's the thing that we, at least with my podcast, that I try to stress with all the different stories and what we try to tell people of us paying off student loan debt, is just like, we stop having analysis paralysis and we just say, we got to move forward in a direction. And, if we make a mistake, so what?
So what?
We just keep going and keep going,
exactly.
And that's paid a lot of dividends for us.
Right. And I think, Nee mentioned this earlier, but, and you asked what's next. And what's next for us is just kind of building wealth. And, we talked about it today, and we were talking about building generational wealth. What about that? what would be the sense of all of this, right? What would be the point of all of this if we can't pass it on generationally, if we can't pass it on, to our own communities? That's the point of all of this. We do medical missions, usually in Ghana, West Africa. And I mean, think about all of the things that we would be able to do if we just put our minds to it and say, you know what? We don't have to worry about the burdens of debt. We can actually put all of our resources towards creating something really, really good for a lot of people for generations to come. So I think that's what's next for us.
That's a great answer. The great answer. And I think that, Nee, your podcast, hopefully with my podcast, we're trying to empower physicians to be able to do this, teaching them how doctors are, and like you said, outside of the box thinking and in different ventures, teaching them about the simple financial things that they need to know that they didn't know. And that's, generational wealth. I like it. I think that's a really great goal. And, that's even if you don't get there, the aspiration, like they say, aim for the stars, at least you'll hit the moon. So, right. Fantastic. Right. Well, guys,
it's narrative student loans for our son.
Exactly. Well, hey,
we're joking.
I want to thank both of you guys for coming on the show. Nee, tell us where our listeners can find your podcast. I'm sure most of them already listen to it.
No, please. Thank you for giving me a chance to tell people about the show. Show is Docs Outside the Box, a show about ordinary doctors doing extraordinary things outside of medicine. You can find it
And you can find it at premedstrategies.com. That's plural, premedstrategies.com. And basically, I empower pre-meds with strategies to help them overcome the challenges of getting into medical school.
And then keeping up with the Darkos also, right? That your guy.
Yeah, our blog is called Keeping Up with the Darkos. We've been promising to get our own URL for the longest time, but it's Keeping Up with the Darkos, all one word, keepingupwiththedarkos.wordpress.com.
Okay, perfect. And I will link those on the show notes and also your other ventures, because there's not enough time to keep up with you guys and all those things you're doing.
Well, I just wanted to say, Tarang, keep doing what you're doing. This is a phenomenal show. You're an excellent interviewer, and your topics, I listen to your show. Your topics are really, really on point. And, one person by one doctor, like you're doing the job of educating doctors in a way in which we never got a chance to in medical school. So right. I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, keep expanding, keep the interviews going. I learn a lot from them, and I know that your audience is learning a ton from you also. Awesome.
Well, thank you. And likewise, as I said, you've been, the inspiration for me and several, many other podcasters, but several who I've actually talked to directly have said the same thing. So thank you very much. And I appreciate you for coming on this show.
Thanks for having us.
You.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to that podcast. They had they're such a fun couple to talk to, and obviously very comfortable in talking in front of or on the microphone and podcasts as well. So if you're one of the few physicians who haven't checked out Nee's podcast, I definitely encourage you to do so. A lot of really great interviews and topics, and he definitely keeps you entertained throughout the show. So I encourage you to check that out at Docs Outside the Box, and check out Renee's pre-med coaching business, and we'll put all the links on our show notes. But I hope you were inspired to take control of your own financial future, because once you do so, it really is able to open up a lot of other avenues for you in the future. So keep up the good work, and thank you once again for listening to Dr. Money Matters. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Dr. Money Matters. If this is the first episode you have heard, I appreciate you taking the time out and listening, and encourage you to listen to our past episodes. I would also appreciate you leaving me a positive review on Apple Podcasts, and also recommend you join our Facebook group, where we have ongoing discussions about this and other topics in order to help each other reach our financial goals. Finally, I encourage you to subscribe to our email list, and also to subscribe to the podcast itself on the various podcast app that you use, in order to be kept aware when the latest episode comes out. More episodes of this podcast are available at www.drmoneymatters.com and on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Audio versions are also available on YouTube and Facebook. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Money Matters or on Facebook or Instagram at Dr. Money Matters, all spelled out. Thanks for listening, and if you get a chance, please leave a positive review for this podcast, as it helps move the podcast up the rankings on iTunes and gets it exposed to a wider audience. Thanks for listening once again, and stay tuned for another episode coming soon.